Samiers, S-U-S-A-N-M-E-A-R-S.
You may proceed.
May it please the court, Mr. Ain. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Ms. Mears.
Good morning.
You were asked to bring in certain items of evidence so they could be introduced, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that includes Defense Exhibit CP, which is the Gatorade bottle,
Yes, sir.
and including the Defense CR, which would be, I guess, the cardboard which the syringe was in.
I don't actually know the contents originally of the bottle.
Okay.
I never opened it.
And you collected the items that were inside the bottle.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the Disney bag.
Yes, sir.
And was that brought in as well?
Yes, sir.
That would be Defense CO. The Disney bag.
I don't know what exhibit number it is. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
May I approach the witness briefly, Judge?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I believe we have a stipulation that the items of evidence discussed by Dr. Rickenback. The state has no objection to the introduction of those items.
I have no objection to the introduction of the ones that he's marked for identification. There was testimony about a syringe, and I don't believe that is contained within those packages.
Does she have this one? Do you have the syringe, or does the Orange County Sheriff's Office have it? Or,
I have what I believe might be the syringe with me, yes.
okay. Can I have that? Your Honor, I believe there is no objection from the state to introduce this item into evidence as well. It hasn't been marked yet.
Let's get it marked so we know what we're talking about.
You need to sign. Okay.
We will move that item into evidence as well.
Okay, would you hand them all to the clerk? I think you had some more that you had offered, but you had not handed to the clerk so she can receive those items in the evidence. And there being no objections from the state,
Correct.
they will be received in evidence as defense exhibits.
CP will become defense exhibit number 34, CR will become defense exhibit number 35, CO will become defense exhibit number 36, and DE will become defense exhibit number 37.
We have no further questions for Ms. Mears.
Cross-examination.
None.
Thank you, Ms. Mears. You may be excused. The defense may call their next witness.
We would call Stephen Shaw, Your Honor.
My name is Stephen Shaw, STEPHEN-SHAW.
You may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Shaw.
Good morning.
You have since testified in this case, have you not?
I have, yes.
Okay. Your Honor, I would move to recertify Mr. Shaw as an expert in trace evidence, hair and fibers.
Okay. Mr. Shaw will be again accepted as an expert in those areas tendered.
Mr. Shaw, I'd like to show you items Defense Exhibit DC, DB, DA, CZ, CY, and CX. Mr. Shaw, do you recognize those photos?
I do recognize these.
Okay. And are they the photos taken of certain hairs that you have when you conducted your new study?
These are photographs of antemortem hairs stored in various conditions during my study.
And this is the study that you conducted after you were deposed in this case?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you say antemortem, you mean hairs taken from living people?
Correct. Hairs removed from living individuals.
I'd like for you to look at them and make sure that they are a fair and accurate representation of the photographs that you have taken of the hairs.
Yes, I recognize all these as photographs that I took during the research study.
And they are a fair and accurate representation of such?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, we would move these items into evidence.
As an objection, no reprobative.
You may.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move.
Objection overruled.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Bass.
Yes, sir. At this time, we would move these items into evidence.
They will be received in evidence as defenses.
CX will become defense exhibit number 39, CY will become defense exhibit number 40, CZ will become defense exhibit number 41, DA will become defense exhibit number 42, DB will become defense exhibit number 43, and DC will become defense exhibit number 44.
Now, Mr. Shaw, you had, I guess, many, many hairs in this study, right?
I did. I had 600 hairs collected from 15 living individuals.
Okay. And when you did this study, you, of course, were trying to see if the darkening band could be developed from living people.
Objection, pleading.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
Yes, sir. One of your goals was to see if you can duplicate any banding, correct?
Objection, leading.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
What was the purpose of your study, sir?
Purpose of my study was really inspired, as I mentioned previously, by a thesis at John Jay College had presented or I had come across. And during that study, they had taken hairs and submerged them in water or put them in water as well as in soil. And they suggested additional studies be done to simulate these conditions and other conditions and compare them to hairs known to be removed from postmortem individuals. And so that's what I did. So I put hairs from living individuals in various conditions, under various conditions, trying to see if indeed I could get postmortem banding from these hairs.
And the person that suggested this was the person who was having their thesis done, correct?
That's correct.
Was it a master's thesis or a...
I believe it's a master's thesis.
Okay, so someone was trying to get their master's degree. They wrote a thesis. They came up with these new findings.
Objection, leading.
I have not finished
Just
the
a
question.
second. He hadn't finished the question.
They came...
Mr. Shaw, before you answer the question, wait for me to tell you to answer. Finish your question.
That's right.
They came up with these new findings, and you as a scientist kind of wanted to expand upon that. Would that be a fair characterization, or do you have another characterization?
Objection, leading, compound question.
Sustain is the compound.
Was
Rephrase
the,
the question.
yes, sir. Was the purpose of your study to expand on that prior study?
Yes, it was.
Now, the FBI has issues when they testify on postmortem loop banding a exhibit. Do you recognize this exhibit, sir? Known as states NO.
I do recognize that, yes.
And this, so you can demonstrate to the jury what postmortem banding looks like.
Yes, that's correct.
May I publish this to the jury, Judge?
Yes, you may.
Yes, sir.
That was what?
States NO.
That's identification. I mean, is it in evidence?
Judge, this was a demonstrative exhibit.
Okay,
It was marked for that purpose.
all right.
I have those photos. Your Honor, at this time, I would like to publish to the jury states evidence 123.
You may.
Sorry, not 123. 39. Excuse me.
You may.
I think counsel misspoke. It's defense exhibit 39. You said states exhibit 39.
Apologize then if I said that. I must have- Okay. Defense 39. Can you tell us what we're looking at here? Oh, sorry. Can everyone see that? Okay.
Counsel expand it out so the witness can see the entire slide so he can identify. There we go. Thank you.
Can you tell us what we're looking at, Mr. Shaw?
This is a hair that was stored in water for 17 days. So it's a hair collected from a living individual and then stored in water for 17 days. And this is one of the hairs, as was another approximately 193 hairs or 190 hairs approximately that were put into the test that I spoke about earlier, my previous testimony. And so this is one of the hairs that was initially identified as postmortem banding by one of the examiners that took that test in their initial analysis.
And what they did was, they identified this area here as postmortem root banding, or is that the area?
I would assume that's the area.
Okay. And they mistook it for something like in this photograph?
Objection. Counsel's use of the word they assumes a fact, not an evidence.
Sustain.
The examiner mistook the characteristics, which the characteristics appear similar in this photograph.
The examiner identified it as initially as postmortem banding in their initial analysis.
Okay. And then, of course, another examiner had a different opinion.
That's correct. The other examiner did not identify it in their initial analysis, and when the two conferred with the confirmed results, they excluded this hair.
Okay. And the both examiners were aware that this was a study and what the hypothesis of the study was, correct?
Objection. Leading.
Sustain.
Were both of these examiners aware of the study, that it was a study?
Objection. Leading. Same question.
Sustain.
I think it's an open-ended question. What knowledge did the individuals have who examined this hair about what they were doing?
They knew that it was a test. They knew that I had been conducting a study on environmental exposure to hairs. But that's all they knew. They didn't know, obviously, the answers to the test. They didn't know if I had put any postmortem actual hairs from deceased individuals into the test. So there's over 200 hairs that they examined. And in their initial analysis, each examiner correctly identified all the postmortem banded hairs. Examiner 1 did identify one of the antemortem hairs as banded. Examiner 2 did identify a different antemortem hair as banded in their initial analysis. They then had a confirmed results answer sheet where they excluded those 2 antemortem hairs and included all the postmortem banded hairs.
Now, was it presented to them? Well, let me rephrase that. They didn't think that this was an actual case that they were working on. They weren't given hair like it came in from evidence with an evidence package and things like that. They were fully aware that they were being tested.
That's correct. They knew it was a test.
Okay. Now I'd like to show you defense evidence 41. What are we looking at here, sir?
This is another antemortem hair, so another hair removed from a living individual submerged in water for 17 days. And this is the hair that examiner 2 initially identified as a banded hair in their initial analysis.
And if I can zoom in a little bit, I don't know if and you can observe through this photograph the darkening area here, correct?
Correct.
And one of the examiners made a mistake with this one initially.
Yes, that's correct.
Has everyone had an opportunity? Okay. And they would be this photograph somewhat resembles some of the characteristics in these photographs, do they not?
I believe they're clearly different.
Okay. You do, but one of the examiners does not.
In their initial analysis, that's true, but through their discussion and an additional examination, they excluded this hair as postmortem banded.
And what are we looking at here, sir?
This is another hair removed from a living individual and stored or buried in potting soil for 100 days.
And is there some apparent decomposition beginning to appear on this hair?
Yes.
And where would that be demonstrated? Can you show that for us?
Yes, there's some striations in this area,
If you touch, okay, got it,
in this area here.
got it. I'm going to now show you defense 43. What are we looking at here?
This is a hair from a living individual buried in potting soil for approximately 100 days, or for 100 days.
And are there apparent decomposition beginning to start on this hair?
Yes, there is.
And can you show us where?
Yes, in this area here.
I'm going to now show you defense 40. What are we looking at here?
That is another hair removed from a living individual that was submerged in water for 17 days.
And what's happening to it? What do you notice? Does it? Well, actually, let me rephrase that. Does it show any apparent decomposition?
There was some apparent decomposition in this hair as well.
Okay. And can you show us where?
In this area.
Okay. And what about the root? Is that normal, the darkening there? Right over here?
It can be. It can be dark at that end from living individuals.
Okay. So that's normal. That has nothing to do with what you might consider postmortem root banding.
That could be normal.
Okay. Oh, is there any other ongoing studies at the FBI on this type, on different environmental conditions for hair?
From living individuals?
Yes.
No, not that no, there's not.
Okay. So the only, how many studies are you aware of that have been done on environmental conditions affecting hairs?
I'm aware of 3 studies.
3. And is this an ongoing area of study for hair scientists?
Yes, so I am conducting research still in this area. It's a way to build on postmortem banding and that discipline.
Okay. Now, sir, I'd like to direct you to your report that you wrote on January 27th, 2009. Do you have that report with you?
I do. May I refer to it?
Yes.
Could we have the FBI lab number and the shooter of the exhibit so that I can find it?
08121 3001.
What's the Q number?
Q number 59, 60, and 62 to 64, 66.
Because I don't,
Sure.
I don't see that.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
Mr. Ashton. May I unpublish this, Judge, the light
may.
from... Okay. Yeah, that's what I was... Is that correct? Okay. All right, Mr. Shaw, can you tell us what you were asked to do on this date, sir?
On in this report, I reported on hairs and fibers that were recovered from a hair mass, item identified to me as debris from the skull, as well as 3 pieces of duct tape.
Okay. And what were your findings?
Could we give the in-evidence numbers just so the record is clear which items he's talking about to the jury?
Q59, the hair mass, and then Q62. State's evidence 302. State's exhibit 271.
I believe, which one is which? I think
271 is the hair mass.
the other one, 302 is the tape.
Correct. Can you tell us what your results were in those examinations, sir?
Yes, there were no hairs suitable for meaningful microscopical comparisons purposes found on the duct tape. that were also microscopically dissimilar to the head hairs recovered from the hair mass. In other words, there were head hairs, Caucasian head hairs on the duct tape. All of these Caucasian head hairs were consistent with the hairs found in the hair mass.
And did you also recover textile fibers?
I did, yes.
And what was done with those?
Those were preserved on glass microscope slides.
Okay. Did you conduct any examinations on those textile fibers?
I did not.
I have no further questions for this witness.
Cross-examination.
Mr. Judge, just so no one is confused, all of the hairs on the tape were consistent with coming from the same person that the hair mass came from.
That's correct. All of the hairs suitable for comparison were consistent with that.
Now, the items that Mr. Baez showed you a moment ago, those are a small selection of some slides that you prepared for a PowerPoint that you discussed during your direct testimony but didn't show, correct?
Some of those, yes.
Now, did you do studies of hairs decomposing in cars and car trunks, correct?
That's correct.
But none of the photographs that Mr. Baez just showed you dealt with those hairs, did they?
That's correct.
This time, Your Honor, I move into evidence State's Exhibit QL, which is the PowerPoint that was discussed during his direct testimony during the State's case.
No objections.
Be received in evidence that states
While she's doing that, Mr. Shaw, would it be helpful in explaining the entirety of your study to utilize the PowerPoint to explain it to the jury?
Yes, sure.
Once she's done, Your Honor, we'd request permission to publish that.
you may.
Let me publish it to the witness and make sure that which one of the, should we start with, can you see the screen here?
I can now.
Okay.
Yes.
Should we start with figure 1? Which would be best to start with?
Yes.
All right, let's start with figure 1. All right, may I publish to the jury?
You may.
And Mr. Shaw, if you just want to let Mr. Perez know when to advance to the next slide, we'll go on to the next, kind of explain what we're looking at here and what it means.
Sure. As I said, there were 600 hairs from 15 living individuals used in this study.
Announce. You may continue.
So this is a representation of some of those hairs, photographs taken before and after their exposure. So you can see these are hairs stored indoors on a windowsill for 233 days. You can see on the left-hand side is the hair before it was exposed, and on the right-hand side is the hair after it was exposed. So there is some apparent discoloration by sitting in the windowsill, it appears, but there's no apparent decomposition in these hairs.
And the basic difference in the appearance of these two hairs in the before, it's the different color hair. Is that correct?
Of the before.
The before pictures.
The before is the same hair as the after. So above is from one individual. The first two slides at the upper left-hand quadrant and upper right-hand quadrant, that is one individual, and it's the same hair. So it's the hair before exposure and the hair after exposure. In the lower half of this page, you have hair from a different individual, a single hair, and it's the same hair, the hair before it was exposed on the left-hand side and the hair after it was exposed on the right-hand side.
My point was that these two people obviously have different color hair, which is why the one of the hairs appears very light, the other darker.
That's correct.
All right. So in interpreting something like post-mortem banding or any kind of decomp, you have to take into account what color the hair was originally and then how it changed. Correct?
No, I don't think you need to know the color of the hair in order to identify it as postmortem banding. You don't need to know what color it was beforehand.
Next slide.
Next slide. Yes.
Next slide, please.
This is additional hairs stored on the dash of a vehicle. So this vehicle was parked in direct sunlight throughout the time period. So in this area, about 202 days in direct sunlight and not used during that time period. So you see the before is on the left-hand side, and the after is on the right-hand side.
Now, this vehicle sat unused, correct?
Correct.
And during what months was this?
This started in August and continued on for approximately 7 months, 6.7 months approximately.
And the hairs exposed in that regard, do they show any changes due to decomposition?
No, there was no apparent decompositional changes in these hairs at all.
You ready for the next slide?
Yes, please.
Next slide, please. Okay. How about these?
These were hairs stored in the same vehicle, but in the trunk of that vehicle during the same time period and for the same number of days as I mentioned earlier. On the left-hand side, you have hairs before, and on the right-hand side, you have the hairs after their exposure. So there was no apparent decompositional changes here either.
And this was in a vehicle trunk for almost 7 months.
That's correct.
And you said this was was it outside in the sun or was it in the shade?
This vehicle was parked in a non-shaded area.
So direct sunlight
Direct sunlight when there were sunny days.
for 7 months
For approximately 7 months.
and no change.
Correct.
Next slide, please.
These are hairs stored outdoors in a grass area, and this grass area was in an area where it could receive direct sunlight. And there was, as you can see in the upper half, the picture before and then the picture after, and you can see there is some change there, and some slight darkening and longitudinal striations at the proximal end or root end in the upper quadrant. In the lower half are additional hairs. Outdoors, what happened a lot was the roots were actually missing in many of the hairs. And it looked like there was apparent insect activity to the hairs lying outdoors. And so that's what it appears happened on the lower half of this page. There's the before on the left side and the after on the right side. You can see the root is completely missing.
Did you find some of that also in the Q59 hairs, the ones from the hair mass where the root was missing or badly decomposed?
There were some roots missing, yes.
Okay. Next slide.
Next slide, yes.
Next slide, please. All right.
This is a hair stored outdoors in a wooded area, so it did not receive direct sunlight. It was in a shaded area, and it was stored for approximately 14 days or 2 weeks. And there is some apparent decomposition, as you can see, at the root end, but no post-mortem banding.
Explain to the jury why it is, and I'm circling this darkened portions here, why is that not post-mortem root banding? From an expert's perspective, how do you exclude that as post-mortem root banding?
For post-mortem banding, you need to have an opaque band just above the roots. And so the root should be intact, at least mostly intact, and you should have a band above that root. In this case, the root itself appears to be decomposing. So the soft tissue of the root itself appears to be decomposing.
And it takes a great deal of training to understand the subtle differences between various types of decomposition artifacts, doesn't it?
It does take some training, and also the microscope itself is a very useful tool, obviously, not just the photographs that you're seeing in two-dimensional, but using a microscope and focusing up and down on the hair, you can see where the hair begins to get its shape. So you can see that soft tissue of the root. and it doesn't, the hair doesn't have its shape at that point. But as you move up and just above the root, you can see that the hair is beginning to get its shape by focusing up and down on the microscope itself. You get more of a three-dimensional picture. And so that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that opaque band above the soft tissue of the root.
And is that one of the essential aspects of postmortem root banding, is the placement of the band in that very distinct area?
Yes, it is.
And without a three-dimensional stereo microscope, is it really possible to appreciate that distinction?
Not fully, no.
Okay, if we go on to the next slide.
This is another hair stored outdoors in a wooded area for 14 days. And there was, as you can see, the before shot and then the 3 after shots after that. So there was some apparent decomposition with this hair as well, but no postmortem banding.
Next slide, please.
These are additional hairs, or this is an additional hair stored outdoors in a grass area that did receive some direct sunlight for approximately 107 days. And you can see some apparent decomposition in that soft tissue area of the root.
That would be, if I'm circling this area here, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Right. But that's not postmortem root banding.
No.
Next slide, please.
This is an additional hair stored outdoors in a grass area again for 107 days. And you can see there is some apparent decomposition in this area. It's more, as you go up in magnification, you can see it's more actually longitudinal striations. So not really a band in that area, but more darkening and longitudinal stripes, if you will, in the hair.
And again, is that one of those subtle distinctions that with training and the right equipment, you can appreciate?
Yes.
Next slide, please.
This is two additional hairs stored outdoors in a wooded area. Before on the left-hand side, after on the right-hand side. You can see in this particular hair the apparent decomposition in the soft tissue of the root. And in the lower quadrant, you can see the root itself appears really to sort of be shriveling in that particular, on this lower half quadrant.
Is that the portion I've just circled?
Yes.
Okay. Next slide, please.
This is a hair stored submerged in water for 17 days. And you can see there is some considerable change in the root, in the proximal ends. And so there's darkening in this area, but it is too far down into the root, into the soft tissue of the hair.
Is this one of the hairs that Mr. Byers was asking you about, the ones that one of the analysts originally thought was banding but then wasn't?
No, it's not.
This is a different one. So
Yes.
This hair, even though it does show that darkening, both of the analysts excluded that as postmortem banding.
Correct.
All right, next slide, please. Let me get the annotation out of there. All right, go ahead.
This is an additional hair submerged in water for 100 days. And there are some longitudinal striations in this area here. And as you magnify and see it at higher magnification, you can see striations in that area.
All right, next slide, please.
This is a hair submerged in water for 100 days. You can see some significant change in the root, in the size of the root itself, this soft tissue. And there is some darkening also in this area. And as you go up into magnification, you can see it's darkened, especially on the outside edges, but not an opaque band in that area.
Next slide, please.
This is a hair submerged in water for 100 days. And you can see some changes with this hair as well.
but not banding.
No postmortem banding.
Next slide.
This is hair submerged in water for 100 days. Some slight changes to those hairs, but no postmortem banding.
Next slide, please.
This is a hair buried in potting soil for 17 days. And you can see some pretty significant changes again in this soft tissue, but no postmortem banding was observed.
Now, this darkened area here, again, that's not postmortem banding,
No,
even
it's
though
not.
it's a little dark. Next slide, please.
This is another hair buried in potting soil for 17 days. And again, a lot of decomposition as far as the soft tissue of the root. And you can see just how much of that root soft tissue is missing, but there's no postmortem banding there.
Next slide.
This is a hair buried in potting soil for 100 days. And again, the soft tissue decomposes or apparently decomposes, and giving you a darkened area at the end of the root,
But not banding.
but not banding.
Next slide.
Another hair buried in potting soil. Again, some changes at the root end, including some darkening and striations at this root end, but no postmortem banding.
All right, if we could go on to the next file. Pardon me. Let me, hold on one second. Let me just unpublish for a moment while we get that set up, just in case. Go ahead, figure 2. All right, tell us about this. This first slide, this is one of the photographs that Mr. Baez asked you about on direct, correct?
It is, yes.
Okay. Explain to us why that isn't postmortem banding.
Yeah, for one thing, the band itself is much longer than it should be for postmortem banding. So the darkening itself is much longer. There's also very little to no tissue intact on the end of the root itself.
Now, again, looking at this under a 3D microscope with the ability to zoom in, can you better appreciate exactly where the root starts and ends and that evaluation?
Yeah, as far as where the soft tissue starts and ends, especially, it's much better appreciated using a microscope in 3-dimensional and focusing up and down.
But this hair was stored in water, right?
This hair was stored in water for 17 days.
This is not one of the hairs that was stored in a trunk or in a car.
That's correct.
Next slide, please. Is this one of the other ones that Mr. Baez asked you about?
Yes, this is the other hair that one of the examiners initially identified as postmortem banded.
Why is that not postmortem banding?
This one is too far down into the soft tissue of the hair.
So where would postmortem banding be on this hair? If you can tell from the photograph, if you can't without the microscope, I understand.
You really can't, without the microscope, determine exactly where it would be, but it should be further up. You can see there. You can see a little bit of how the hair is changing its shape in this area and begins to get its shape here. At least it appears so in the photograph. But to really appreciate that, you do need a microscope.
And the difference between the importance of that difference is because the hair, in fact, changes at that period from being soft tissue to being hard. Is it keratin? Do I have that right?
It is right. It's not fully keratinized. The idea behind postmortem banding is that the follicle protects the soft tissue. So the soft tissue is further down into the follicle and it's protected. Then above where you see postmortem banding, the hair is completely keratinized. So it's not susceptible or as susceptible to decomposition. So what you get is this one localized area that is susceptible to decomposition. So you get this specific band.
So it's the interior is soft, so it's susceptible to decomposition, but the outside is hard. Did I understand you correctly?
No.
I'm sorry. Good.
No, the soft tissue, what happens is the hair grows, it continues to harden and develop as it grows and moves up the follicle. And just above where you see that band is where the hair appears to completely harden and become permanent and dead. Where you see the band is the hair is not completely formed, it's not completely hardened, it's not completely keratinized. Below that band, the soft tissue itself, the reason that it's thought not to decompose with what we see in postmortem banding is because it's further down into the follicle and better protected.
All right. Next slide, please. Clear the annotation. All right. Tell us about this one.
This is a hair removed from postmortem from a cadaver stored outside on the ground surface. And so the banded area is here. And this is one of the hairs used in the test.
And that is what you look for under, again, with the aid of the 3D microscope of postmortem banding.
That's correct.
Next slide, please.
This is another hair that was used in the test. This is removed postmortem from cadaver stored outside on the ground.
Now, this does appear to have a bit of a striation going farther into the root. Why does that not exclude it as postmortem banding?
Because you still have a very distinct area where the hair is banded just above the soft tissue.
So that's what you're looking for.
Yes.
Next slide, please.
This is another hair that was used in the test, removed postmortem from a cadaver stored inside a house.
Now, in addition to the postmortem banding, is there also other apparent decomposition of this hair?
I don't know that this is apparent decomposition. It could be just a dark area in the person's hair.
And again, is that something you can't determine without having it under the microscope, the ability to manipulate it, zoom in, zoom out, and really look at it?
Yeah, even with a microscope, I don't know that you could determine that was apparent decomposition. It depends. You may be able to, but it may also just be an artifact of that person's hair sample.
Next slide, please.
This is another hair removed postmortem from a cadaver stored in a vehicle.
All right. Next slide, please.
Another hair used in the test, removed postmortem from a cadaver stored inside of a house.
Next slide, please.
Another hair removed postmortem from a cadaver stored outside on the ground surface.
Next slide, please.
Another hair used in this test, removed postmortem from a cadaver stored outside on the ground surface.
Now, is each one of these hairs from a different cadaver, or there are some that are multiple hairs from the same cadaver?
There are some hairs from, there were 5 cadavers used in this study, so I removed hairs from 5 different cadavers. So some of these are from the same cadaver.
All right. Next slide, please.
These are another hair removed postmortem from cadaver that was stored outside on the ground surface.
All right. Next slide, please.
Again, a hair used in this test, removed postmortem from cadaver stored outside on the ground surface.
Next slide, please.
This is another hair removed postmortem from a cadaver stored outside on the ground surface.
Next slide, please.
Another postmortem banded hair removed postmortem from a cadaver stored in a vehicle.
Next slide, please.
Another hair removed postmortem from cadaver stored inside a house, and these are all hairs that were used in the test.
All right. And these are all evidences of what happens to they're evidence of what we call postmortem root banding.
Yes.
All right, I believe we have perhaps one other slide. Or one other set of slides. All right. Okay, again, these are examples, again, of the hairs from living people that were stored under various conditions and what you see.
Right.
Take
correct.
us through it.
Yes, and this is hair that we discussed earlier. There
Oh.
is some apparent decomposition submerged in water, but no, not post-mortem
But
banding.
not banding. Okay. Is there another slide? Is this the only one?
This, again, is one of the hairs that we discussed earlier, buried in potting soil for 100 days.
And again, we see some changes, but not banding.
Correct.
Next. Yeah, error actually worked for us on that one. Again, the condition is indicated in the slide, some changes, but not banding.
Correct.
Next slide. Let me get rid of the annotation. How about this one?
A hair removed from a living individual and buried in potting soil for 100 days. So there is what may be some change in this area. I don't recall if I did identify that as change, but it appears there may be.
Some change, but certainly not banding.
Correct.
Next slide. End. Thank you. Of all the slides and all the various environmental conditions that you have exposed these hairs to, based on the slide presentation we've seen, did you have any hairs which were stored in a car, in a vehicle, that displayed any kind of darkening that might be similar to or mistaken for postmortem banding from
No.
vehicles?
No.
No further questions?
Redirect on those issues?
Mr. Shaw, the hairs that you tested in the trunk, did you put them in garbage?
No, I did not.
Did you have any that were in garbage?
No, I did not.
Okay. I know, if we can bring that up. I notice in your PowerPoint that all of the hairs taken from living people have the number of days before they were collected, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you go through some slides? Keep going. Yeah. That's fine. Go back. But all of the slides that contain hairs that come from post-mortem individuals don't have any dates. Is that correct?
That's correct. That wasn't put on the slides themselves.
All right, let's talk about these for a second. This hair that was outside of a house on the ground surface, how long was it there?
Can I refer to my notes for that?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I can't see the slides.
I'm
so
sorry.
Not sure.
May I publish to the witness, Your Honor? May I also publish to the jury, Your Honor?
You may.
Did everyone see that? Okay, let's go back for a second. One slide. Okay. What I meant to say, I'm sorry, I apologize. The jury didn't have a chance to see what I was referring to. Every slide that you have from a live person says the exact days on each slide, correct?
That's correct.
And if we can go to the next slide. And every slide that you have from a deceased person does not have how many days when that hair was collected, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, let's start with this hair. How long was this hair outside on a ground surface?
That hair was placed in January the 27th of '04, and the hair was collected on March the 5th of '04.
So this is 3 months. More or less 3 months?
Approximately around 2.5 months.
Okay. And these were in Tennessee in the wintertime,
They were, yes.
which are completely different environmental conditions than in this case, right?
I'm sorry. Then
The environmental conditions for which this hair was exposed to are completely different. Tennessee in the wintertime is much colder than Florida in the summertime, right?
I would expect so, yes.
Okay. So the environmental conditions that this hair was exposed to are completely different than that which would be in this case.
Right. The outside conditions, yes, are.
Okay, let's go to the next. And what about this hair?
This hair was placed on January the 27th of '04, and the hair was collected on February the 26th of '04, so approximately a month.
A month. And this was also Tennessee in the wintertime?
Yes,
Completely different than in this case. The conditions, the environmental conditions.
complete different temperatures than I would expect in June, yes, of in Florida.
Next one. Okay, we have this one stored inside a house. How long was this one in a house?
For approximately 1 month.
Okay. Do you know if they had heating in the house or air conditioning?
I don't.
Okay. And was this also in Tennessee in the wintertime?
Yes,
This one stored in a vehicle. How long was it in there?
placed February the 28th of '05 and collected March the 16th of '05. So a little less than a month.
A little less than a month. Was this also in Tennessee in the wintertime?
Yes, it was.
And the car was outdoors. It wasn't inside a garage or anything, was it?
Correct. That's right.
Completely different environmental conditions than in this case.
Colder conditions than I would expect in the summer in Florida.
Next slide. Same thing with this one for the house. How
Yes.
long? How
Yes.
long?
Approximately 2 weeks.
Okay. And you don't know the conditions or the temperature of the house or anything like that?
No, I don't.
And of course, this was different environmental conditions than in this case.
Yes.
And this one, sir.
This hair was placed January 27th of '04 and collected February 18th of '04.
Okay, so approximately a month.
Couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay. And this was also Tennessee in the wintertime.
Yes, it was.
Completely different than this case.
Different environmental conditions than I would expect in the summer, yes.
Thank you, sir. Nice. What about this one?
This hair was stored in February for approximately 1 month.
Okay. Same environmental conditions, Tennessee in the wintertime.
That's correct.
Okay, next. And what about this one?
This hair was stored outside surface for 4 days.
Okay. And where was this? Tennessee in the wintertime as well?
Yes.
Next. What about this one?
This hair was stored in '04 for a little over a month in Tennessee.
Okay. And the next one. What about this one?
This hair was stored for approximately a month outside surface in Tennessee.
Okay. All right. Did your findings show that you got different reactions from the hairs based on different environmental conditions?
With the research
Yes.
study, yes.
Okay. And there is absolutely no way for you to replicate the exact environmental conditions that were the Q12 hair in this case.
Objection leading.
Overruled.
I did not replicate all the conditions in this case. I'm not even aware of all the conditions in this case.
In fact, even if you were, you probably couldn't, right?
I don't understand.
If you knew more facts about this case, you still don't know how long that hair was there.
That's correct.
In fact, this hair could have been there for months
Could have been, right.
and exposed to any number of environmental conditions.
Right, I don't know.
Okay. And of course, one day you hope to be able to determine what exact indicators come from a deceased person. Do you not in your studies?
I'm not sure I understand that.
Sure, I'll rephrase the question. Do you, as a scientist, hope to one day be able to look at a hair and be able to determine that it came from a dead person?
Well, postmortem banning, it is a well-established science. It's based on examining hairs from living individuals, examining hairs from deceased individuals. It's based primarily on experience of examiners throughout our field. And so it is well established. The research is there to learn more. And so I wouldn't say I'm hoping to do anything. I'm just trying to learn more. And that's what this research was aimed at, gathering additional information.
But the science as it is right now is you cannot say that a specific hair, without knowing where it came from a dead person, correct?
We can't say that absolutely, right?
Okay. And you hope to one day, with all of your studies and the advancement of science, be able to determine that one day, right?
I wouldn't say I hope to do that. No, I just want to learn. We want to know as much information as we can about it, and whatever information that gives us, it makes us a better forensic scientists.
Wouldn't that knowledge assist you, though? I mean, wouldn't you like to know one day, looking at a hair and be able to say, okay, this indicates that this came from a dead person?
Not necessarily. I mean, if we were able to replicate it, I did try to replicate postmortem banning in this case. I mean, I put it in potting soil where I thought decomposition could be high. I put it in vehicles for a long period of time, intentionally parking them in direct sunlight, seeing if I could get postmortem banning. So my intentions were to put it in conditions that I thought were conducive to decomposition. So if we saw postmortem banning, then we would know, hey, under these certain conditions, we can get postmortem banning. But I didn't see that.
My question, sir, is not to diminish the importance of your study. I understand that. My question is you want to be able to learn more as a scientist and to be able to give definitive answers in the advancement with more experiments, correct?
Yes, we do want to learn more. We want to know as much about it as possible. But I wouldn't say that, I want to be able to say postmortem banning only comes from deceased individuals. That's not the goal. The goal is to learn more about postmortem banning.
And you would also like to learn more as to what environmental conditions create what indicators in hair, correct? I mean, you'd like to learn more. You don't want to just use your study and the thesis, the master's thesis, correct?
Sure, you want to continue to build on every discipline.
And perhaps one day the science will be sophisticated enough to be able to establish exactly what environmental conditions have what effects on an individual's hair, correct? Exactly.
As I said, I believe it is already well established, but yeah, we're trying to learn and gain additional information.
And this is well established through your experiments and through the experiments from the student getting her master's degree.
No, this is well established because of experience of examiners in our field. And again, that's examining hairs. You know, we deal with homicide cases routinely. And so we examine hairs from deceased individuals often.
My question, sir, relates to the environmental conditions.
Even in casework, we have hairs, you know, in cases and throughout different locations in cases that are exposed to environmental conditions. And I have yet, in my experience, found a hair that I've not been able to associate with postmortem banding that I've not been able to associate to a deceased individual.
And the examiner who misidentified one of these hairs, they can't make that statement in a court of law, can they?
Asked and answered, argumentative.
Sustained as the argumentative.
I have no further questions.
Any recross as to those issues?
I do, briefly. The studies that you base your opinions on aren't just these hairs from Tennessee, correct?
That's correct.
I mean, you use these as an example, but the literature contains studies of hairs from many different areas of the country under many different environmental conditions. Isn't that correct?
Overruled.
There are publications with images of banding, but you know, again, it's based also on experience and receiving cases all over the world, really.
And to this point, the only environmental condition that has consistently been found to lead to postmortem banding is the attachment of the hair to a decomposing body. At this point, that's where the science is, correct?
That's correct.
No further questions.
Mr. Shaw, you did this study because you wanted to learn more, not because you had a little extra time on your hands, did you?
Objection asked and answered.
Sustained.
Did you conduct this study because you wanted to learn more?
Objection asked and answered.
Sustained.
I have no further questions.
May the witness be excused.
As far as the state's concerned, yes.
Defense.
Yes, sir.